This video is sponsored by Kinguin. More on them later. Do you want to know what makes me excited? I mean, hopefully not. As if I'm gonna start a new year by showing that I really love long walks on the beach, or when she takes pictures of her feet with shoes on. You know, the joke being that this isn't something that people usually share with the world, and also, my childhood is ever so slightly ruined now, I think. Oh no, I didn't see that one coming for 2024. But nah man, I'm here to talk about video games, and fortunately they get my motor running just fine on their own. 2023 is a tough act to follow, since it felt like every other week we were blessed with wonderful video games, but I remain fairly confident that 2024 can, at the very least, have a favourable matchup with one of the most impressive lineup of games that we've had for a long while. If it can't, that's fine also. I just need to get this video out into the world before every game on it is released. Which is a worry, since Skull and Bones comes out in like 5 days, if this video goes up on time, so I'm running out of chances to have my say, but thankfully this video is sponsored by Kinguin, who provides some awesome deals on all sorts of games and other software, including the upcoming Skull and Bones, which I gotta say, looks cool. I like pirates. I'm kinda bored of Sea of Thieves. With Kinguin, there's over 200,000 offers with new ones every day, so you're highly likely to find something that you like, and Kinguin even have a 24/7 support team for fixing any issues you may have. They've given me my own promo code, which is really easy to use and gives you 12% off of all purchases, and if you're interested in using it to buy games quickly and for a great price, then head on over to king.in/Luigi and use the code Luigi in all caps for 12% off everything site-wide. That link is also in the description if you fancy using that instead. Thank you to Kinguin for sponsoring this video. Anyway, the best that 2024 has to offer, hopefully. Do you remember the last Alone in the Dark game? If you can't remember, that would be Illumination, a game so shockingly awful that it was created either as a technical exercise to try to get the lowest Metacritic score possible, or as some rights-retaining stunt that didn't work anyway since Atari lost the rights shortly after this armpit of a game saw the light of day. I cannot overstate how awful Illumination was. It was a multiplayer shooter that tested friendship, since anyone you invited would resent you for dragging them into this shit show. So, with all that considered, would excitement be the right word to use when describing 2024's Alone in the Dark? Yeah, I don't know, but there is a certain amount of how bad can it be about it. There is a degree of excitement surrounding this game because it's an attempt to reimagine the original from way back in 1992, and while I think that could well be an impossible task given all of the video gaming that has happened in the last 32 years, Jesus, that's disgusting, I do want to see how this game pans out. The original Alone in the Dark was kind of the blueprint for Resident Evil, and given how well that franchise adapted away from fixed camera angles, I hold out hope for something similar here. The Grace in the Dark demo was decent if not sensational, which shows that we're at least heading in roughly the right direction, but hopefully we've got some improvements coming soon. Also, this game was delayed until 2024 to avoid crunching the employees over the Christmas period, so bonus points for not being awful. The bar is low these days, come on. I actually spent so long making this video that Tekken 8 came out before I had the chance to declare it as a game that I was looking forward to. What can I say? I was enjoying my time off, and events were transpiring very quickly at the start of the year that made returning as a content creator not the juicy apple that it once was. All the same though, Tekken 8 did great, but now I need to hurry up and talk about some video games because if I'm not careful, Banished's Ghosts of New Eden is due to be released just before Valentine's Day, and we're getting mighty close to that now. No, I haven't got her anything fancy. We're getting married next year so she can have some flowers and enjoy them. Maybe a mug if she's lucky. Banished strikes all the right chords with me. A year after Life of P came out and showed that a new IP can be heavily influenced by Soulsborne games while still retaining some of its own identity, I am once again hopeful that Banished's Ghosts of New Eden can repeat the same trick. In fact, it seems to be doing something very interesting, which is marrying this kind of focus on action with a more cerebral approach to how player choice can impact the progression of the story. And when you remember that it's Don't Nod who are the ones behind Banishers, the same guys behind Vampire and the two Life is Strange games, at the very least we should get a decent story out of all of this. And we're hunting ghosts too, so I should fucking hope so. Some games can be sold on premise alone. Listen, I'm not getting any younger, and games are fucking expensive these days, so I need a hook of some sort to convince me that a game is worth my attention. Flintlock: The Siege of Dawn was already an intriguing game thanks to a title that immediately makes me think of cool pirate pistols, which is kind of a thing that happens in the game, although without the pirates. But Flintlock went silent for the best part of a year after its reveal in March of 2022, before poking its head out a few months ago with a gameplay trailer. What I like is that we've got an obvious influence from that influential third-person action game that made a lot of money, but it looks like the Flintlock forms a pretty fluid combo system where you can shoot a motherfucker in the face at the end of a string of moves. You've also got this hatchet for huge melee hits that actually reminds me of quite a bit of God of War, and it'll be interesting to see how these influences mesh together. In recent times, we've had both some very impressive games like this that are able to reinvent the formula, and also some seriously mediocre efforts too, so it'll be worth watching Flintlock closely to see what side it ends up on. Please, 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 don't be Forspoken. If you ever want to play a series of horror games more for the creativity instead of the out-and-out horror, then the Little Nightmares games are a great option. I'm not going to pretend that these are obscure little indie games that no one knows about, which really wouldn't work anyway since we're up to Little Nightmares 3 now, and we should definitely have some idea of what kind of game to expect by this point. They are fascinating games to play since they prefer to steer away from horror cliches like jump scares and prefer to let all of their nifty ideas scare you slowly instead. The slight worry is that Little Nightmares 3 is now under new management. The two previous games were brought to life by Tarsier Studios, but after an acquisition in 2019, this latest Little Nightmares game is actually being headed by Supermassive Games, the Until Dawn guys. This is mildly troubling since Tarsier brought a lot of unique flair to Little Nightmares and worked really hard so that the series would have this playfully horrific atmosphere to it. There's every chance that Supermassive come in and pick right up where Tarsier left off, but it will take a solid understanding of what kind of horror game Little Nightmares 3 needs to be in order to pull this one off. Supermassive and Bandai Namco have done good work with horror games recently, so let's see if they still got the sauce. One game this year that I was always likely to miss the deadline for was Suicide Squad: Kill the Justice League, and the good news is that I never planned to talk about it as a game that I was looking forward to in 2024. When it was slated for 2023, I was excited, but all the news surrounding it trampled my expectations, and it looks to be another useless live service game that people will stop caring about from roughly March onwards. AAA can be a little hard to be excited for these days since we've had so many high-profile failures, but luckily I don't have to talk about too many of them today since Hyper Light Breaker is due out in 2024, and that's plenty of video game for me. Hyper Light Drifter is one of those rare games that I was introduced to by my sister, and she 100%ed this thing because she loved it so much. It's a wonderful game that sinks its claws into you with its awesome combat and then keeps you engaged by letting you explore its fascinating world, and Hyper Light Breaker looks to be a three-dimensional sequel. Hey, that's not an automatic hit by any means, since maybe adding another axis breaks everything that made Drifter so cool, but I don't know. I've seen a few trailers and Breaker is giving me serious Nier Automata vibes, but with like lots more color. Could well be terrible when it comes out, but I bet it's not. I feel like we could be in a position later this year where every other developer kind of loses the excuse of development hell complicating a game's dev cycle if and when Stalker 2 Heart of Chernobyl comes out. Yes, the standard stroll through development hell is hardly a walk in the park, but you kind of gain new perspective on it when you realize what kind of chaos has been going on behind the scenes with Stalker 2. Developers GSC Game World are Ukrainians, so you can probably work out why the last 2 years have been especially challenging, but even before the Russian invasion, GSC had to deal with Kickstarter scandals and halted development, and more recently they've had to relocate their studio to Prague and have been bombarded by cyber attacks. So it will be a minor miracle if we end up with Stalker 2 releasing in any kind of decent condition, but given how good the last game was, I'm even more invested in how all of this turns out. It's a weird game to be excited about, since with every other game, I'd be disappointed if it ended up being pushed back until next year, but with Stalker 2, anything we get, I'll be grateful for. It's so strange since the usual letdown of a game delay has been traded out for a sort of, yeah, sure, you guys take all the time you need. Anything you make is kind of a freak of circumstances anyway. If I have to talk about Stalker 2 this time next year, I don't give a fuck. To bend the topic of this video a little bit, I am truly fascinated to see what the hell Konami end up cooking up with the Snake Eater remake this year. Yeah, I'll be the one to remind everyone that this game is happening, and until we hear anything about it, it still has at least some chance of being good. To be fair, they're remaking my favourite game ever, and if there's enough talented people on the dev team, they might be able to figure out all of the amazing qualities that went into creating one of the best games of all time, even if the mastermind behind it has long since been kicked to the curb to make games that are somehow even more confusing. So chalk it up to morbid curiosity or something even more masochistic, but I remain fairly invested in what Konami are doing here. A large, very loud part of me knows that it won't end well, because it rarely has done with this franchise recently, but I remain cautiously optimistic, and that is cautiously with a capital C, that the short snippet of gameplay they released a while ago is somewhat reflective of what the final product will be, and that most, if not all, of the original's magic will be retained. Am I expecting the Delta remake to be amazing? No, not really, but I wouldn't be upset if it was. In a world where a series of fiercely underwhelming films have heavily neutered my interest in Star Wars, we may well have to rely on some creative video games to breathe life into the sad state of post-Disney Star Wars. Honestly, that wouldn't be the craziest reality. The two Jedi games were shockingly good given that they're single-player games made by EA in the last 4 years, so if anything, there should be a little bit of expectation behind Star Wars Outlaws, since we're currently living in a bit of a purple patch for Star Wars video games. Outlaws is different and potentially riskier than the two Jedi games though, since it pulls back away from the smooth swishiness of lightsaber combat and delves into the dangerous territory of giving a Star Wars character a laser gun and hoping that this will be fun to play. Star Wars has done some good as a semi-traditional FPS, and hopefully Outlaws' decision to be third person should alleviate some of the concerns that this game will just feel like any other shooty game, but given that it's being made by Ubisoft, the concerns start to creep back in that Outlaws could wind up feeling uncomfortably generic if the devs aren't really careful. Still though, I like feeling somewhat excited about Star Wars projects again. It's almost a novelty at this point. If you asked me a decade ago if I would have expected episodic Final Fantasy games in the future, I'd tell you no, because that sounds like a fucking awful idea. Honestly, without further context or explanation, it just sounds like we're trying to churn out a new game as frequently as possible without any particular reason other than those beautiful Benjamins. And I'm sorry, but Square Enix have other franchises they can ruin by doing that. However, Final Fantasy VII is undergoing this radical transformation into a remake that is trying really hard to justify its existence by way of remaking and reworking nearly every part of the original game. Final Fantasy VII was 4 discs on the PS1 after all, so there's a lot to remake here. And we are due 3 of these remakes before Square Enix want to break from printing money, so Rebirth is in the perfect position to build on the first remake and to set up the last game with some kind of amazing cliffhanger. The story is hard to unpack because so far we've skirted around Aerith's death by just not doing it, and it's a significant trait of this remake series that we seem to be doing everything possible to not kill her off. There's been hints that Rebirth ends in the Forgotten Capital where Aerith has the big swim in the original, but that still doesn't shed much light on what will be a unique Final Fantasy experience that could go in any direction. I just want to spend more time with these characters and this combat system. Fuck knows what we end up doing with either of those. If I was a betting man, I wouldn't put any decent money on Hollow Knight Silksong coming out this year. Granted, if it does, it's a wonderful day for everyone, but I spent 3 consecutive years hoping that Tears of the Kingdom would come out, so I'm not going with Silksong today because I need to channel my optimism in a more realistic direction. I am pinning a lot of my hopes on an indie game though, and with Hades 2 due to enter early access at some unknown point in the year, I do have something very exciting to look forward to. The first game was one of the surprise hits of 2020 and was easily one of the best games that many people played in a year that was hardly starved of action. I have a special love for roguelikes since their replayability makes them something that you can play for genuinely years if you love the game enough, and Hades was addictive enough for this to be a real reality. I'm sure there are people who have just played it all the time in the last 4 years. Hades 2 should be an exciting new chapter since it's the first sequel to any game that Supergiant Games have ever created, and I want to see why they've gone full sequel instead of DLC. I mean, more Hades of any kind was always going to make my year so much better, but being able to play as Zagreus' sister Melinoe, who is an immortal witch, so at the very least you'll play different, and you're looking at a fundamentally different game. Hades 1 is one of the best games of all time, so if Hades 2 is even half as good, 2024 is going to do just fine. And yeah, those are my picks for the games that I'm most excited for in 2024. Do you agree, or is there a game that you clearly are way more excited than I am? Let me know in a comment down below, and if you enjoyed the video, leave a like and hit subscribe for more, and hit that bell for notifications of every new upload. If you need something else to watch right now, the last video I made was the best games of 2023, and I also want to thank my top supporters on Patreon, including Christopher Robinson, Scott Riker, and Sarah Malion. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.